Okay, in this chapter, we're going to talk about workplace mass murder. So, what is the profile of a workplace avenger? They're often middle aged white men facing termination. They see little opportunity for finding another job and suspect that all breaks for other jobs are going to go to younger competitors. They often feel entitled to a well paying, meaningful job, and their family may be counting on them for financial support. It's also important to remember that despite changing gender roles, men still tend to judge their self-worth by what they do, and they also tend to regard violence as a means for establishing or maintaining control. So at the University of Alabama in Huntsville, 3 people were killed and 3 others wounded in a shooting in February of 2010. During the course of a routine meeting of the biology department, attended by 12 people, Professor Amy Bishop stood up and began shooting those closest to her with a 9mm handgun. Bishop was sentenced to life in prison without parole. In March of 2009, she'd been denied tenure at the university, making spring 2010 her last semester per university policy. It turns out, once they investigated this, it looked as though there were previous violent incidents in which she'd been involved, and they went back and reevaluated those. One was when she shot and killed her brother in Massachusetts in 1986, and she was also questioned after a 1993 pipe bomb incident directed towards her lab supervisor. So let's learn a little bit more about Amy Bishop.
The Alabama professor charged with killing 3 colleagues. Amy Bishop is on suicide watch this morning as we learn new details from her husband about her trip to a firing range just weeks before the shootings. Plus new information from Massachusetts police about the day Bishop shot her brother more than 20 years ago. Andrea Canning is in Braintree, Massachusetts, has the latest for us this morning. Good morning, Andrea.
Good morning, Robin. And that was ruled an accident at the time, but sources tell ABC News there may have been a cover-up in the DA's office because Bishop's mother was a member of the police personnel board. Now, I spoke to Bishop's husband yesterday by phone. He tells me the one thing he wants to get out there to everyone is that his wife is innocent of all the past crimes that keep getting brought up. Weeks before Amy Bishop allegedly pulled the trigger, killing 3 of her colleagues, she had visited this shooting range. Her husband says they even went together, but in a phone interview with ABC News, James Anderson said he doesn't know where his wife got the gun used in Friday's tragedy, and there was no way to predict she would snap.
Nobody understands what happened. Nobody knows. I mean, I can't sit down and talk to her and ask her, what happened, what went wrong, what broke.
Didn't happen. There's no way.
What about the people who died?
There's no way they're still alive.
We're now learning chilling details of Bishop's alleged rampage. Biochemistry professor Deborah Moriarty tells a reporter that 1 hour into the routine faculty meeting, Bishop opened fire, methodically shooting professors at the table one at a time. Moriarty managed to crawl into the hallway. Bishop followed, ready to shoot, but when she pulled the trigger, her gun clicked out of bullets. Moriarty scrambled back into the room, and the remaining professors barricaded the door. Bishop's husband says she was upset over being denied tenure at the university, but was once well-liked.
She was loved and respected by everybody in the scientific community and by her students. They all liked her. They all loved her. That's the problem, is all these closed things have been, brought back up.
A once-hidden past Tom Pettigrew knows all too well.
I got the shotgun stuck in my chest. She told me to put my hands up.
In 1986, he says Bishop came into his store, agitated with a gun. Police say she had just shot her brother in the chest. The chief ruled it an accident despite accounts that she had been fighting with her brother right before the gun went off. Pettigrew says she told him a very different story.
She told me that her husband was after her. She got into a fight. He was looking for her. He's going to kill her. She's looking for a car. She needs to get away.
In 1993, Bishop was a suspect in an attempted mail bombing of her Harvard professor. Police say she was upset over what she thought would be a negative evaluation of her work. She was cleared due to lack of evidence, and in the coming years, she was praised for her work and was even featured in this article for her scientific inventions.
With very high intelligence and very high creativity, you often get other baggage with that.
But while some admired her, others just didn't get her. Police in her former Massachusetts neighborhood called the family regular customers, saying Bishop would repeatedly call 911 on kids riding their dirt bikes and playing basketball. Neighbors say she even tried to ban a local ice cream truck because it wasn't fair to her kids, who who were lactose intolerant. The chairman of the campus chemistry department says it was Bishop's bizarre lone wolf personality that may have cost her that tenure at the university. Her husband says he tried to cheer her up in recent days, telling her she was beautiful, she was smart, and she has an IQ over 160. Robin?
And joining us now is University of Alabama Huntsville President Dr. David Williams. Thank you for joining us. There was a professor who stepped forward and is given credit for stopping what was already a horrific incident, and that is Professor Deborah Moriarty. She was there in the room when the shooting took place and was able to confront Dr. Bishop. What more can you tell us about her actions and how she helped bring this to an end?
I believe that she acted very quickly to try and stop Dr. Bishop from firing again. She survived 2 attempts to shoot her, and she managed to help stop barricading the door when Dr. Bishop left the room. So it's just unbelievable how somebody can act that way in such terrible circumstances.
Dr. Bishop was denied tenure last year in 2009, and her husband said that he believes that was one of the things that set her off. Why was she denied tenure?
The tenure process took most of that academic year. The final decision was made in March of 2009. Dr. Bishop appealed the process. The appeals process took, again, a significant period of time because of the importance of the tenure decision. The appeal was denied. The original decision was upheld in November.
In November of 2008, you touted her on your blog for an invention that she created. Was there any time that you felt anything was out of sorts with her, anything out of the ordinary with her? And how much did you have to do with her? How well did you know Dr. Bishop?
There are over 300 faculty members on this campus. I know Dr. Bishop. I know many of the members of the Department of Biological Sciences and, of course, other professors. The particular case that was quoted in terms of Dr. Bishop's invention, that's an example of some research done at the university that generated intellectual property that had the chance to turn into a small startup company.
I know that you have spent time in the hospital
Yeah.
with some of the victims and their families. How are they doing? What can you tell us about their conditions?
The last I heard yesterday was that the 2 who remain in hospital are still in intensive care, and there's still a lot of work to be done to bring them back to their families. But when I last spoke to the families, they were much more upbeat than they were at the start of this process. So we are very, very hopeful that they'll continue to improve and they can return to their families and homes as quickly as possible.
That is good news indeed. And finally, Dr. Williams, tell us about the campus and the community. How are you healing?
We're going to spend the rest of this week building towards a memorial service, which will be 7 o'clock this Friday evening, when we hope to be able to celebrate the lives of those amazing faculty members. We plan to start classes again next Monday, when all those students in biological sciences and other departments that rely on our biological sciences faculty will be able to get back into the classroom and move towards completing their courses and their degrees by the end of semester.
The lives lost certainly should be celebrated, as you said. Dr. Williams, thank you very much for your time this morning. Take care.
Thank you, Robert.
A distinguished Harvard-educated scientist reduced to this. Listen closely, you can hear a...
Sorry about that, guys. So, in workplace, we tend to see 2 types of frustration that may engender enough resentment to be translated into extreme violence. So, one can be endured long-term cumulative frustration, and that makes it really difficult to cope. Maybe they never get the right job, the right promotion, or a decent raise, and the firing becomes the final straw. The other is folks who come to feel invulnerable to job loss because of their long-term employment with the same company. They've given their best years to their boss, and what do they get in return? Sometimes profit motives become infused with the need for revenge. John Taylor is a former employee of a restaurant, and his accomplice Craig Godineau were involved in a killing at Wendy's. Taylor had been fired and replaced with Jean August, a less qualified candidate. The robbery was carefully planned. Taylor forced his former manager there and to summon the 6 employees upstairs to his basement office on the pretense of having an important meeting. Taylor and Godineau took the 7 into the restaurant's freezer, bound and gagged them at gunpoint, put plastic bags over their heads, and shot each of them in the head. All but 2 of them died. One of the two survivors, Patricio Castro, dialed 911. Major Nidal Malik Hassan declared that he was the Fort Hood shooter. He fatally shot 13 people and injured more than 30 others at Fort Hood. He was unmarried and described as socially isolated. He was born in the U.S., was a practicing Muslim, and became more devout after the deaths of his parents. His opinion turned against the United States after he heard stories from his patients who had returned from fighting in Afghanistan and Iraq. Because of what he said was discrimination and his deepening anguish about serving in a military that fought against Muslims, he told some members of his family he wanted to leave the military. He also received poor evaluations and was warned that he was doing substandard work. Fellow students and faculty were deeply troubled by his behavior, which they described as disconnected, aloof, paranoid, belligerent, and schizoid. Murder by proxy is when the victim is an extension of the actual source of anger. So PSA Flight 1771, Burke had been fired from his job as a ticket agent a few weeks earlier. He had a spotty employment record, and he boarded the plane with the intention of getting even with his former boss who regularly took that flight. Gunfire happened in the cabin, a scuffle in the cockpit, and the plane plunged 22,000 feet to the ground. Employment can combine with other difficulties like romantic obsessions. Richard Farley was a former employer of ESL Incorporated, and he stalked his coworker Laura Black for 4 years, beginning in 1984. She got a temporary restraining order against him in 1988 and had a court date set for about 2 weeks later to make the order permanent. Farley purchased a shotgun along with various other weapons and equipment, and numerous pistols were also at his disposal, along with over 3,000 rounds of ammunition. So at that time, the restraining order didn't prevent him from buying weapons. The day before the court date, he loaded up his various guns, entered into a side door by shooting through the glass, and shot at employees he encountered while heading towards Black's office on the second floor. Several employees were killed by his shots as he made his way through his former employer's building. Arriving at Black's office, he opened the door, which she slammed in his face. He fired a shotgun round through the door, hit her in the left shoulder, and collapsed her lung. The injury sent her unconscious to the floor while he moved on. Farley then held a police SWAT team at bay for 5 hours by moving from room to room so that the snipers could not target him. Black and other survivors eventually escaped, and Farley surrendered to police after requesting a sandwich and a soft drink. A total of 7 people were killed and 4 more wounded, including Black, and a total of 98 rounds were fired. Most disgruntled employees do not take their anger out on the company. Some do externalize their blame, though. So Thornton was caught on surveillance stealing beer from his employer and given the choice to resign or be fired. Instead of leaving, he took 2 Ruger SR9 semi-automatic pistols from his lunchbox and opened fire. In just a few minutes, he killed 8 coworkers and seriously injured 2 others. As the police closed in, he called 911 saying his motive for the massacre was racism he had experienced in the workplace. And he told the 911 operator he wished he had killed more people. Soon after hanging up, he killed himself. So for people who are socially isolated, when they lose work, which may be the only meaningful part of their lives, they lose everything. So Newman was someone whose social isolation swallowed any sense of purpose and provided much too much time to dream about revenge. He sought revenge 2 months after being fired, letting himself into the building through a rear entrance armed with a handgun and a large hunting knife. He singled out his 5 victims and shot them in the head, and then fatally shot himself as deputies responded. He had a history of minor crimes, mostly associated with traffic, and had been fired in 2017 for starting fights with people. The lead manager who fired him later feared he would return for revenge. And police had also dealt with him in 2014 when he was accused of battering a coworker at the factory. So what can we do to screen out potential problem workers? Well, before we employ somebody, it's really not feasible to conduct complete background checks. And prior employers are often reluctant to give a bad reference for fear of being sued. In fact, in many states, your prior employer can only verify that you worked at the company and when you worked there. Even if we were to use profiles, we know that they are profiles designed to predict rare events tend to overpredict and produce a large percentage of false positives. And then any efforts to identify problem workers may actually create a self-fulfilling prophecy where a combative employee becomes enraged when they're singled out. Between 1983 and 1993, there were 11 separate murderous incidents in postal facilities that claimed a total of 34 lives. So years ago, people often referred to workplace murder as going postal. So the post office had a lower rate of workplace homicide than the national average, but focusing on disgruntled employees who attempted to get even, the post office had far more than its fair share of violent episodes. So postal workers were getting very little response and were often stereotyped as lazy. They believed their jobs were on the line, and some felt entitled because of their long-term service. Since then, the post office has upgraded administrative procedures, and it has improved morale and decreased workplace violence.